I stood outside my own son's house, holding 2 bags of groceries. In the November cold, I could see the lights on inside. I could hear the television. I could see shadows moving past the window. They knew I was there, and they pretended I wasn't. That moment, standing on that porch, bags cutting into my fingers, breath coming out in little white clouds, that was the moment everything changed for me. Not just the situation, not just the relationship. Me. Something inside me shifted, quietly and permanently, like a fault line settling after years of pressure. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because to understand why that moment broke something in me, you need to understand what came before it. You need to understand who I was before I became the woman standing on that porch. And you need to understand exactly who put me there. My name is Carol. I'm 61 years old. I have brown eyes that my late husband Dennis always said looked like warm coffee. I have hands that have kneaded bread dough, bandaged scraped knees, folded 10,000 loads of laundry, and held the hands of people I loved more than my own life. I am not a dramatic woman. I never have been. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the daughter of a school teacher and a man who fixed furnaces for a living. We didn't have much, but we had everything that mattered. Sunday dinners, a garden in the backyard, a mother who taught me that the way you love your family is through showing up. Every single time. No matter what. I married Dennis when I was 24 years old. He was tall and quiet and funny in a way that sneaked up on you. He laughed at his own jokes before he finished them. He could fix anything in the house except the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom, which dripped for 11 years and somehow became a thing we loved about our home. We had one son. His name is Michael. And from the moment he was placed in my arms in that hospital room, red-faced and screaming and absolutely perfect, he was the center of my world. I know every mother says that, but I mean it in the specific, cellular way that changes a person. Michael wasn't just my child. He was my project, my joy, my proof that I had done something right in this world. I stayed home with him for his first 5 years. Dennis worked long hours at the printing company, and I was the one who was there for every milestone. First step. First word, which was more, by the way, and we laughed about that for years because it was so perfectly Michael. First day of school, when he cried at the door and I cried all the way home and then sat in the driveway for 20 minutes because I couldn't stop. I went back to work part-time when Michael started school. I worked in the front office of an elementary school for 22 years. I loved those kids. I loved being surrounded by the chaos and the noise and the sticky-fingered energy of children. But I always knew that my real work, my most important work, was at home. I made dinner every night. Real dinner, not frozen things, not takeout. Pot roast on Sundays, spaghetti on Wednesdays, homemade soup when anyone was sick. I baked Michael's birthday cake every year until he was in his 30s. Yellow cake with chocolate frosting. His choice every single time. When Michael was in high school, Dennis was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. He managed it for years, but by the time Michael was in his late 20s, Dennis's health was declining. I became his caregiver on top of everything else. I learned to manage his medications, his diet, his appointments. I watched the man I loved slowly become a smaller version of himself, and I loved every version with everything I had. Dennis passed away 4 years ago, quietly in the morning while I was making coffee. I still make too much coffee. After Dennis died, it was just me and Michael. And even though Michael was grown, 34 years old by then, living in his own house 45 minutes away, we stayed close. Or at least I thought we did. He called every week. We had Sunday dinner at least twice a month. He would come over and sit at my kitchen table and eat the food I made and talk to me about his job and his life, and I felt like the connection between us was still real. Then Stephanie came along. Michael met Stephanie at a work conference 2.5 years ago. He called me that same evening, which was unusual for him. He was excited in a way I hadn't heard in his voice in years. He said, "Mom, I met someone. She's different. I really think she's different." I was happy for him, genuinely. Michael had dated here and there over the years, nothing serious, and I had quietly worried about him being alone. I wanted him to have what Dennis and I had. I wanted him to have a partner, a companion, someone who made the world feel like a softer place. I met Stephanie 6 weeks later at a restaurant downtown. She was beautiful. I'll say that right away because it's true and because beauty matters in this story, not for the reasons you might think, but because it was the first thing about Stephanie that made me feel uncertain. She was the kind of beautiful that seemed curated. Every piece of her was perfect. Hair, makeup, clothes, all of it polished and precise in a way that felt less like getting dressed in the morning and more like building armor. She shook my hand when we met, not a hug, a handshake. I told myself that was just her way. Some people aren't huggers. I'm not going to judge a person for not hugging me at a first meeting. But then she spent most of the dinner talking about herself. Her job in marketing, her apartment, her travels, the places she'd been, the things she'd done. She was charming about it. She had that quality, that ability to talk about herself while seeming like she was just sharing, not performing. But by the end of the dinner, I realized I hadn't learned a single thing about who Stephanie was on the inside. I knew her resume. I didn't know her heart. Michael was glowing. Looking at her, the way men look at women they've decided to love before they've fully seen them. I drove home that night and told myself to be patient, to give her time, to remember that first impressions are just first impressions. They were engaged 8 months later. Michael called me to tell me. He was happy and nervous all at once, and I told him I was so happy for him, and I meant it, even though a small, quiet voice in the back of my mind was already whispering things I wasn't ready to hear. The engagement was 6 months long. During that time, I saw Stephanie maybe 4 or 5 times, never one-on-one, always in a group or with Michael present. She was always pleasant, a careful, controlled kind of pleasant that never quite felt warm. She always remembered to ask about my garden and to compliment the food I made, but it felt like she was checking boxes, performing daughter-in-law correctly. I ignored the feeling. I told myself I was projecting, that I was one of those mothers who couldn't let go of her son, that I was creating problems where there weren't any. Dennis had always said I was too good at seeing the difficult truth before other people were ready for it. He didn't always mean that as a compliment. I threw myself into helping with the wedding. I offered to help with flowers. I offered to help with the guest list. I offered to help with anything Stephanie wanted, and she accepted my offers with that same careful pleasantness and then quietly did everything her own way anyway. I made Michael's wedding cake myself, the bottom tier. I spent 3 days on it, drove it 45 minutes to the venue in my car, holding my breath at every turn. At the reception, I heard Stephanie tell her mother that the bakery they'd hired had done a beautiful job on the cake. Michael didn't correct her. I went to the bathroom and stood at the sink and looked at myself in the mirror for a long moment. Then I went back to the reception and danced at my son's wedding. Because that's what you do. The first year of their marriage, things were not terrible. I want to be honest about that. I want you to understand that this is not a story about a mother-in-law who never accepted the marriage. This is not a story about jealousy or possessiveness. I had done the work internally of accepting that Michael's primary loyalty now belonged to his wife. I knew that. I believed in it. But there's a difference between accepting that your son's primary loyalty is to his wife and watching your son disappear. In the first year, we went from Sunday dinners twice a month to once a month, then to once every 6 weeks. Michael still called, but the calls got shorter. He started seeming distracted, like he was half listening, like there was somewhere else he needed to be. When I visited, Stephanie was always polite, but the politeness had a quality to it that I can only describe as territorial. She was always there, always present. There was never a moment when Michael and I could just sit in the kitchen and talk the way we used to. She would drift in and settle on the couch near us, not joining the conversation, just nearby. I noticed things. The way Michael glanced at her before answering certain questions I asked. The way he would change the subject when I mentioned our family, old stories, old memories, things we'd shared before Stephanie existed in his life. The way he stopped calling me Mom on the phone and started calling me Carol. That one stung. I didn't say anything, but it stung. I still came over. I still brought groceries. I still cooked when I was invited to cook. I still helped in every way I was permitted to help, and I kept the boundaries they set without complaining. Because I loved my son. And because I was still telling myself the voice in the back of my mind was wrong. Then came the money. It started small, the way these things always do. About 14 months into their marriage, Michael called. Me on a Tuesday, unusual, and he sounded tight and worried. He said things were a little difficult right now, financially. The mortgage on the house had gone up, some unexpected expenses had come in, and they were just stretched thin for a few weeks. He asked if I could loan them $2,000. I want you to understand something about my financial situation. Dennis had left me in decent shape. Not rich, we were never rich, but stable. I had his life insurance, a small pension from the printing company, my own savings from 22 years of work, and the house, which was paid off. I lived carefully. I didn't spend extravagantly. I had built a cushion because Dennis had been the kind of man who believed in cushions. I gave Michael the $2,000 that same day. He said he'd pay it back within the month. He didn't pay it back that month. When the month passed, I didn't mention it. I told myself it was fine. It was money, and money was not worth fracturing a relationship over. 3 months later, he asked for $3,000 more. He said Stephanie's car needed repairs, and the bill had come in higher than expected. He said they were getting back on track, but needed a little bridge. I gave it to him. I noticed that time that he didn't say much about paying it back. He said, "I'll make it right, Mom," which is different from "I'll pay you back in a month." I noticed, but I didn't say anything. A few weeks after the second loan, I was at their house for dinner. Stephanie had made chicken, which was fine, and we were sitting at the table, and I happened to glance, at the kitchen counter. There was a catalog there, open to a page of countertop materials. There were circles and notes around some of the more expensive options. A kitchen renovation. I thought about the $5,000 I had given them in the last 3 months for unexpected expenses. I thought about the $2,500 countertop that had circles and notes around it. I didn't say anything, but I started paying closer attention. Over the next year, it became a rhythm. Every 2 or 3 months, there would be a call from Michael. Always on a weekday, always when I was alone, always with that tight, worried tone that I had come to recognize, and always with a need. Car payment they'd fallen behind on, a medical bill, an unexpected expense, a home repair that had to happen right away. Each time, the amounts were always just under the level that would make me have to really think. $2,000 here, $1,500 there, $2,500 for the thing with the roof, which I later noticed had not, in fact, been repaired. In 18 months, I had given them just over $22,000. I knew this because I kept track, not because I was building a case, not because I was planning anything. I kept track because Dennis had raised me to know where my money was. He would have been horrified if I hadn't. And here is the thing that was hardest to see, the thing that took me the longest to admit to myself. The money always seemed to correspond with something new in the house. New kitchen countertops, a new sectional sofa that I'd heard Stephanie mention wanting, a weekend trip they posted photos of on social media, a new television, and not a small one. I started to understand that the emergencies were not emergencies. They were a funding mechanism. I was being used as an ATM, politely, systematically, and with great care. And during this same period, my actual access to my son was slowly, steadily being reduced. Calls got shorter, visits became rarer. When I called at night, Michael often didn't answer, and when he called back, he was vague and distracted. Stephanie had started a habit of texting me, which seemed nice on the surface, little updates, occasional photos, but I realized over time that the texts always served a purpose. They would come right before a request. They were the warm-up act. I started to see the structure of it. And then, about 2 years into their marriage, the visits stopped being invitations and started being arrangements. Stephanie would text me, not call, text, to let me know that Sunday the 14th would work for a visit, and I should come at 2 o'clock, not before, and dinner would be ready by 6, so I should plan to leave by 7:30. 7:30. So I would have a 90-minute window over dinner to see my son. I remember sitting with my phone and reading that text and feeling something I hadn't expected to feel. Not anger. Grief. And then came November. The month everything broke open. It started with Thanksgiving. Specifically, with the fact that Stephanie announced, again by text, that they would be spending Thanksgiving at her parents' house in Connecticut. She wrote, "We'll plan to see you for Christmas, Carol. Probably the 27th. Not Christmas Day, the 27th. I want you to really sit with that. My son, my only child, the boy I had. Made yellow cake for every birthday. The boy I had driven to every soccer game for 7 years. The boy whose hand I held in the hospital while his father died. The 27th. I spent Thanksgiving alone that year for the first time in my life. I made a small chicken because I couldn't bring myself to make a full turkey for one person, and I sat at my kitchen table with Dennis's chair across from me, empty, and I thought about all the Thanksgivings we had ever had, the 3 of us, and later the 2 of us, and I let myself be sad about it for exactly one evening. Then I picked myself up and I started thinking. Because something else had happened that November that I hadn't told anyone about yet. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, Michael had called, same tight voice, another emergency. This time it was bigger. He said they were behind on the mortgage. He said they could lose the house. He was quiet in a way that scared me, not emotional, just quiet and waiting. He said they needed $15,000. $15,000. I had never lent that much at once before. I sat on the phone with him in silence for a moment. Then I asked him, and I kept my voice very gentle. I said, "Michael, can you tell me what happened? How did you get this far behind?" There was a pause, and then he said, "It's just been a hard year, Mom, the economy, everything's more expensive." That was all he said. No specifics, no details, no acknowledgement of the $22,000 he already had from me. I said I would think about it. He said, "Mom, there's a deadline. We need it by Friday." It was Wednesday. I said I would call him back. I hung up and I sat in my kitchen for a long time, and I thought about something Stephanie had said to me months ago, in passing, almost casually. She had mentioned that she was thinking about leaving her job. That marketing was exhausting her, and she wanted to start something of her own someday. She had been vague about the details, but there was something in how she said it, relaxed, unbothered, that didn't match a woman who was worried about money. I thought about the Connecticut trip for Thanksgiving. I thought about the new countertops. I thought about $22,000 that had never come back to me. And for the first time, instead of asking myself how I could help my son, I asked myself a different question. I asked myself, what exactly is happening here? I don't want to make myself sound like some kind of investigator. I'm a 61-year-old woman who worked in an elementary school office and grows tomatoes in her backyard. I am not a detective. But I am a woman who paid attention. And here is what I found over the course of 4 very careful days, when I started actually looking instead of just feeling. I called my financial advisor. Her name is Renee, and I've known her for 15 years. I told her I needed to understand my current position because I was considering a significant loan to a family member, and I wanted to understand the impact. She went through my accounts with me, and we had a hard conversation. $22,000, it turned out, was not nothing to my retirement picture. It wasn't catastrophic, but it had created a gap that I had not been paying attention to because I had been managing the grief of losing Dennis and the loneliness of the last 4 years and the slow erosion of my relationship with my son all at the same time. And sometimes when you're managing too many hard things at once, you stop watching the details. Renee asked me, carefully, whether I had any documentation of the loans. I did not, because they had never been presented as loans. They had been presented as family helping family, and I had handed the money over because that's what family does, and I had never once asked for a signature or a note, because asking for those things felt cold and suspicious, and not like how a mother treats her son. I got off the phone with Renee, and I sat very still. Then I did something I had never done before, and I am not entirely proud of, but I do not regret. I looked at Stephanie's social media. I had seen it before, of course, but I had always scrolled through it with the mild, half-interested attention of someone who isn't looking for anything specific. This time, I looked carefully. What I found was a timeline. Post from 8 months ago, a photo of a weekend in Nantucket. She tagged Michael. The caption said, "Needed this escape." Post from 6 months ago, new home office setup. Beautiful desk, new chair, ring light, new laptop. Caption, building something. Post from 4 months ago, a photo of a new SUV, her post, her car. Caption, she said yes. Post from 6 weeks ago, a photo of new kitchen countertops. Caption, the upgrade we've been dreaming about. I sat back. Each of those posts corresponded, roughly, to a period when Michael had called me with an emergency. Nantucket, about a month after the $3,000 car repair. Home office, about 2 months after a $2,500 unexpected expense. The SUV, right after the $1,800 medical bill they'd needed help with. The kitchen, the month after the $2,500 for the roof that had not been repaired. I was not funding emergencies. I was funding a lifestyle. And the $15,000 ask, the largest yet, the one with the Friday deadline, that one made me look harder. I did something then that felt like a betrayal, even as I did it. I called Michael's college roommate, a man named Pete who I'd always liked and who still lived nearby. Pete and Michael had stayed loosely in touch. I made the call under the pretense of asking if Pete had a contractor he could recommend. Michael had told me they needed roof work, after all, which was at least technically a story that had been told, and during the conversation, I steered things toward how Michael was doing. Just in passing. Just neighbor to neighbor. Pete said, "Oh, Michael's good. He and Stephanie just got back from Scottsdale. I saw on her Instagram, some resort thing." Scottsdale. The same week Michael had asked me for $15,000 because they were about to lose the house. I thanked Pete and I got off the phone. And I sat down and I cried. Not loud crying, not dramatic, just the quiet kind of tears that come when you've been hoping you're wrong about something and you find out you were right all along. They were not going to lose the house. There was no Friday deadline. There was no emergency. There was a resort in Scottsdale. And there was me. I decided, after those 4 days of thinking and looking and crying, that I needed to see my son. Not a text, not a call. I needed to look at him. I needed to be in the same room as him and understand what was happening between us, underneath all of it, and whether there was anything left to save. I called him on a Thursday and told him I was going to come over Saturday morning. I said I was going to bring groceries and make brunch. I kept my voice easy and normal. I said I just wanted to see him. He said, "Sure, Mom, come around 10. I went to the grocery store Friday and I bought everything I needed. Eggs, bacon, good sourdough bread, the orange juice Michael has liked since he was a teenager, cream cheese, lox because I knew Stephanie liked it. I got the good stuff. I filled 2 bags. Saturday morning, November 14th. Cold and gray, the kind of Ohio November morning that smells like wood smoke and coming winter. I drove the 45 minutes to their house. I pulled up, the lights were on, both cars were in the driveway. I walked up the front path with my 2 bags. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again. I could hear the television. I could see a shadow moving past the side window. I waited. I knocked a 3rd time harder. The shadow stopped moving. Then it moved away from the window. And nobody came to the door. I stood there for a long moment. The bags were heavy. The cold was working its way through my coat. I thought about putting the bags down, but there was ice on the ground and I didn't want to set them in the ice. I stood there for probably 4 minutes, which felt like 40. And then I heard something that I will never in my life forget. I heard laughter from inside. Not at the door, not nervous, uncomfortable laughter, comfortable laughter. The kind of laughter that happens when you've forgotten the person outside exists. I set the bags down on the porch. I walked back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat and I looked at my hands. They were shaking slightly, not from cold. I did not call Michael. I did not text. I did not knock again. I started the car and I drove home and I thought the entire 45 minutes about a single thing. What I was going to do next. People ask me what I felt on that drive home. I think they expect me to say I was furious, or devastated, or that I cried the whole way. But the truth is, I felt something more frightening than any of those things. I felt clear. After months, years, really, of second-guessing myself, of telling myself I was being too sensitive, of minimizing what I was experiencing, that morning had burned away all the fog. There was no more ambiguity. There was no more voice in my head saying, "Give her a chance," or "Maybe you're overreacting." There was just clarity, clean and cold and absolutely certain. My daughter-in-law had been systematically diminishing my access to my son while simultaneously using me as a source of funding for their lifestyle. And my son had allowed it. Whether he was complicit, whether he was controlled, whether he had convinced himself he was just managing 2 difficult women, I didn't know yet. But I knew that he had stood inside that house and let his mother stand on the porch in the November cold, and he had not come to the door. That told me everything I needed to know about where I stood. And so, for the first time in my life, I decided to stop. Not in anger, not in a storm of emotion. Quietly, firmly, the way you close a door that has been letting in the cold for far too long. I was going to stop. No more money. Not $1 more under any circumstances, for any emergency, for any reason, until I had a direct, honest conversation with my son, alone, without Stephanie in the room, about all of it. No more adjusting my schedule to the arranged windows I was given. No more texts from Stephanie telling me when I was permitted to visit. No more accepting a 90-minute dinner slot as a reasonable amount of access to my only child. And there was something else, something bigger. Something I had been thinking about for months without letting myself fully think it. That house. The house I had never told anyone about. When Dennis died, he left me the house we had lived in for 31 years, the house where Michael had grown up. But Dennis had also left something else. His mother, Michael's grandmother, a woman named Ruth, had passed away 2 years before Dennis, and she had left Dennis a small inheritance. Not enormous, but significant. When Dennis died, that inheritance, which he had kept separate and carefully managed, passed to me. The inheritance was a house. Ruth's house, a small, well-kept craftsman in a neighborhood that had, over the years, become quite valuable. Ruth had paid $12,000 for it in 1962. When Dennis inherited it, it was worth about $300,000. When it came to me after Dennis died, and given the way property values had climbed in that neighborhood, it was worth somewhere between $450,000 and $500,000. I had never told Michael about the house's current value. I had mentioned, in passing, that he would inherit Ruth's house someday. The way you mention things like that, vaguely, in the future tense when it becomes relevant, I had not given him specifics. I had not said, "This asset is worth nearly $500,000 and it is currently in my name and you are my only heir." I had not said that because Dennis had specifically asked me not to. Dennis, wise and careful man that he was, had sat me down when he got his first serious diagnosis and said, "Carol, don't tell Michael the numbers. Not yet. Wait until you see who he becomes." At the time, I had thought that was a strange thing to say about your own son. I didn't think it was strange anymore. After that November morning, I spent the week in quiet, steady motion. I called Renee, my financial advisor. I called a family attorney named Gerald who had handled Dennis's estate and who I trusted completely. I told both of them that I wanted to review my estate planning, that I wanted to understand all of my options. And then I did something else. I sat down at my kitchen table with a piece of paper and I wrote down everything. Every loan, every date, every amount, every request and what had been said to justify it, from memory first and then checking against my bank records to make the numbers exact. $22,400. Over 19 months. With nothing in writing. I was not going to build a legal case against my son. That was not what this was. But I was going to have a documented, clear-eyed picture of what had happened, because if and when I sat down with Michael to talk, I was not going to be a grieving mother running on emotion. I was going to be a woman who knew exactly what was real. Gerald told me something during our meeting that I have thought about many times since. He said, "Carol, people who accept money without documentation tend to assume the person giving it has accepted the loss. They tend to assume there are no consequences coming." I let that sit. "Are there consequences coming?" he asked. "Not legal ones," I said, "personal ones." He nodded. "Those tend to be the more lasting kind." After that Saturday, I didn't reach out. That was the hardest part in some ways, because my nature, the deepest groove of who I am, is to reach toward the people I love, to call, to text, to show up, to make the food and bring the groceries and smooth things over and keep everyone connected. But I had learned something painful and true. Sometimes showing up is how you enable people to treat you badly. Sometimes your constant presence is the very thing that lets someone keep taking from you because they know you'll always come back. So I was quiet. Sunday passed, then Monday, Tuesday. On Wednesday, I got a text from Stephanie. "Hey Carol, just checking in. We missed you on Saturday. Everything okay?" "We missed you." I read that text 3 times. I thought about the shadow in the window. I thought about the laughter. I thought about the bags of groceries I had left on the porch and driven away from. "We missed you." I put the phone down, and I did not respond that day. The next morning I texted back, "I'm fine, thank you." 5 words. For a woman who usually wrote 3 paragraphs, 5 words was a very low. D message. On Friday, Michael called. I answered because he was still my son, and because I needed to hear his voice, even if only to understand what version of him I was going to get. Mom, he said, what happened Saturday? You didn't come. I came, I said. I knocked 3 times. No one answered. There was a pause. Oh, he said, we must have been in the backyard. The backyard, in November, in Ohio. With the TV on, I said. Another pause, longer this time. Mom, I think there might have been a miscommunication. There wasn't, I said quietly, evenly. He was quiet. Michael, I said, I need to see you, not at your house. Just the 2 of us, somewhere neutral. I think we need to have a real conversation. He said he'd have to check his schedule. I said, your schedule or Stephanie's schedule? He didn't answer that. I'll text you some dates, I said. I love you. And I hung up. He chose a date 2 weeks later. We met at a diner about halfway between our houses, neutral territory. I got there first and I ordered coffee and I sat with my hands around the mug and I took some slow breaths. Michael walked in 12 minutes late. He looked tired, older than I expected, somehow, not in years but in tension, like a man carrying weight that had been on him too long. He sat down across from me and he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Mom, he said, you look good. Thank you, I said. The waitress came. He ordered coffee. We made the small talk of people who are both waiting for the real thing to start. Then I said, I want to talk to you about the money. He put down his coffee cup. Mom. I'm not angry, I said, and it was true, I wasn't. But I want to talk about it honestly, and I want you to talk to me honestly, and I think we can do that because we're still the people we've always been to each other. He looked at the table. $22,400, I said. Over 19 months, I have all of it written down. He looked up. I never asked you for documentation, I said. I never asked you to sign anything. I gave you that money because you're my son and I love you and I wanted to help you. But I need to understand, Michael. I need to understand what it was for. Because I've started to notice some things that don't quite line up with what you told me. He was very still. Were you in Scottsdale? I asked, the week you called me about losing the house. A long pause. Yes, he said. It was planned before things got bad. The Nantucket trip, I said. The home office, the new car, the countertops. Michael, I need you to be honest with me. Were these emergencies or were they choices? He was quiet for a long moment. And then he rubbed his face with both hands, the same gesture he'd used since he was a teenager when something was difficult, and I felt a wave of love for him so sharp it almost undid me. It's complicated, Mom. I have time, I said. He told me then. Not everything, I don't think he knew everything, and I think that's a whole separate sadness, but he told me enough. Stephanie's spending had been an issue from early in the marriage. She managed their finances, and she managed them with a particular logic. They should live well now, in the present, and figure out the rest as it came. She had grown up in a family where money moved freely and anxiety about it was seen as small-minded, and she had never truly absorbed the concept of a cushion. When they ran short, which happened regularly, Stephanie's solution was to call Michael's mother. Because Michael's mother always said yes. Because Michael's mother was good for it. Because Michael's mother, as Stephanie had apparently said to Michael on more than one occasion, wasn't going to take it with her. I sat with that for a moment. Wasn't going to take it with her. Did you disagree with her, I asked Michael, when she said that? He looked at the table again. Sometimes, he said. But you called anyway. A silence. I'm your mother, I said, not your bank. He looked up and I saw something in his face then, pain and shame, and something that I recognized because I knew him better than anyone alive. He looked like the boy he had been when he did something wrong and knew it, when he was 9 and broke a window and didn't tell me for 3 days. That same look. "I know, Mom," he said. "I know." "I need you to know something else," I said. "I'm not going to lend money anymore, not right now, and I need you to understand why it's not a punishment, it's a boundary. I love you and I want to be in your life, but I need to be in your life as your mother, not as a financial resource. Do you understand the difference?" He said he did. "I also need you to understand," I said, "that being your mother means that I am entitled to see you, not in 90-minute dinner windows that Stephanie schedules for me by text. I am entitled to a real relationship with my own son." He was quiet for a while after that. And then, he said something I didn't expect. He said, "She told me you preferred the texts. That calling felt intrusive to you." I stared at him. "She said you'd mentioned to her that you liked having advance notice, and that calling felt like an imposition." I had never said that, not once, in any form, in any conversation. "I never said that," I said. He looked at me. And the look on his face was the look of a man who has just felt the floor shift. That moment in the diner was the first crack in the version of reality Michael had been living in. Once it opened, more came through. He started thinking back, recalling other things Stephanie had told him about me, small comments, filtered information, things she'd reported I had said or done or implied. He started running them against his own memory and finding the edges that didn't line up. She had told him I disapproved of their house. I had never said that. I had once asked, neutrally, about whether they were happy with the neighborhood, and somehow that had become a report to Michael that his mother found their home inadequate. She had told him I thought their marriage was too fast. I had never said that. She had told him I had made a critical comment about Stephanie's cooking once when we were alone in the kitchen. I had been alone in the kitchen with Stephanie exactly once, for about 4 minutes, and I had said nothing about her cooking except to ask what spice she used in the roast chicken because it smelled wonderful. These were not dramatic lies, they were small ones, the kind that accumulate quietly like snow, each one thin as a sheet of paper, but layered, one on top of another, they had built a wall. A whole constructed reality in which Michael's mother was a critical, intrusive, difficult presence who needed to be managed, which conveniently justified both limiting my access and using me as a financial resource when needed. Because I was not a person with needs and feelings, I was a problem to be handled and a resource to be drawn on. It's a very neat system when you think about it. Michael sat with all of this for several days after our meeting. He called me twice in that period. Short calls, not long, catching up kind of calls, but checking in calls, like he was making sure I was still there, still the person he'd always known. I could hear him thinking. I gave him space to think. And meanwhile, I had my own thinking to do, because there was still the question of the $15,000 he had asked for and not received, and there was still the question of my estate planning, and there was still the question of the house. I met with Gerald a second time in December. I told him everything. The loans, the lifestyle, the documented requests versus the documented social media posts, the conversation in the diner, the manufactured story about my preferring texts. Gerald is a careful man. He doesn't rush to conclusions. He listened to all of it without interrupting. Then he said, "Carol, you asked me last time about your options. Let me be direct with you. In terms of the money that's already been given, without documentation, without formal loan agreements, your options for recovery are limited." "I'm not trying to recover it," I said. "Good," he said. "Then let's talk about what you can do going forward." He walked me through several things. The first was simple, stop, which I had already done. The second was more complex. He talked to me about my estate planning, about the house, about my other assets, about what Michael would inherit and when and under what conditions. He was careful to explain that I had complete freedom to structure my estate however I chose, that my assets were mine, that I could leave them to Michael unconditionally, or I could attach conditions, or I could restructure things in a variety of ways depending on what I wanted to accomplish. He said, "What do you want to accomplish, Carol?" I thought about that for a long time. "I want my son to be okay," I said. "I want him to have the things he needs. I want him to be protected. But I don't want to fund a lifestyle that's destroying his relationship with money, with me, and possibly with himself." Gerald nodded. "And the house," he said. "The house is the most important thing," I said. "I want to make sure it goes to Michael, but I want it to go to Michael in a way that protects it." Gerald told me there were mechanisms for this. Trusts with conditions. Structures that meant the asset would come to Michael, but would be protected from being quickly liquidated or used in ways that weren't in his long-term interest. We talked for a long time. When I left his office, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. In control. Not of Michael, not of the situation, of myself, of my own story. That's a feeling that had been taken from me slowly, piece by piece, over 2 years, and I had not even noticed it going until I finally had it back. Christmas that year was the quietest of my life. Michael had asked, somewhere in the middle of December, whether I wanted to come over for Christmas this year. Not the 27th, Christmas. I said yes. I want to be clear. I had not told Michael what I had been doing with Gerald. I had not told him about the estate restructuring. I was not using any of that as leverage. These were my own private actions, taken to protect my own future, and they were not part of any game. What I had told Michael was simple, that I loved him, that I wanted a real relationship, and that I was no longer available as a financial resource. That was the full extent of what I had communicated. And yet the energy of that Christmas was different. Stephanie was careful. I noticed it immediately. The performative pleasantness was still there, but underneath it was something I had not seen before in her. A wariness, an uncertainty, like someone who had had a very controlled situation quietly slip out of their control and wasn't yet sure what to do about it. She had bought me a gift this year. Last year, there had been a gift card from a pharmacy, not a bad gift, technically, but the kind of gift you give when you want to give the minimum acceptable thing. This year, there was a wrapped box, and inside was a cashmere scarf in a color she must have noticed I wore, because it matched my coat exactly. It was a peace offering. I thanked her warmly and genuinely. I was not cold with Stephanie. I did not have the energy for coldness, and more than that, I didn't believe in it. Whatever she had done, I had no interest in punishing her or making Christmas Day into a battlefield. But I also was not going to pretend that everything was normal. During dinner, there was a moment, the three of us at the table, a nice meal, the house decorated and smelling like pine and candles, when Stephanie said, with great casualness, "Carol, we've been thinking about doing some work on the upstairs bathroom. Finally fixing that layout. It's going to be a big project." She didn't ask for anything, she just mentioned it. I said pleasantly, "That sounds like a great project. Those renovations always feel so good when they're done." And I said nothing else. She waited a beat. I took a bite of the roast chicken. The moment passed. Michael changed the subject. I thought I saw the ghost of something in his eyes, understanding, maybe, or quiet relief. After dinner, while Stephanie was in the kitchen, Michael and I sat in the living room. He was quieter than usual, in a thoughtful way rather than a distant way. He asked about my house, about the garden, about whether I was doing okay on my own. Real questions, the kind with depth in them. I told him I was well, that I was doing a lot of thinking, that I was taking care of myself. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom, for the money stuff. I am." I said, "I know you are, sweetheart." "I didn't see it clearly," he said. "I don't think I wanted to." "People often don't," I said, "until something makes them." He nodded. "Are we okay?" he asked. I looked at my son, my beautiful, complicated, sometimes foolish, always beloved son, and I said, "We're working on it. That's the best thing I can tell you. We're working on it." He hugged me when I left. A real hug, the kind that lasts longer than obligation requires. He held on for an extra second. I drove home in the dark and I cried a little, but they were gentler tears than before. Not grief tears, more like the tears that come at the end of something hard when you can finally see the other side. I had been hoping that after our conversation in the diner, after Christmas, after everything, that the asking would stop. It did not stop. In January, Stephanie texted me, not Michael this time, Stephanie directly. "Hi, Carol. I know this is a big ask, and please feel completely free to say no, but we have a situation with the bathroom project, and the contractor needs a deposit to hold the slot. It's $8,000, and we're a bit short this month. Would you be able to help out? We'd pay you back as soon as Michael's bonus comes in March." $8,000. For the bathroom renovation she had floated at Christmas dinner. I read the text twice. Then I typed back, "I'm sorry, Stephanie, I'm not in a position to help with that." She responded within minutes, "Oh, no worries at all, I totally understand. Just thought I'd ask. We'll figure it out." The exclamation points were working very hard. Michael called that evening. "Hey, Mom," he said, "Steph mentioned she texted you." "She did," I said. "Yeah," he said, and then there was a pause. A long, thoughtful pause that told me he was in a different place than he had been 6 months ago. I told her it wasn't a good idea. "I appreciate that," I said. "We're going to figure it out," he said. "We've got some savings we can use. It'll be okay." There was something in his voice that I hadn't heard in a long time. Something steady, something adult in the best sense of the word. "I know you will," I sigh. "Day." And somehow, that felt like the most hopeful conversation we'd had in years. In February, something happened that I had not anticipated. Stephanie called me. Not texted, called. I was surprised enough that I answered immediately, and there was a half-second of silence on the line that told me she was surprised too. Surprised that I'd picked up, or surprised by her own decision to call, I wasn't sure which. She said, "Carol, hi, I was wondering if we could talk." I said, "Of course." She asked if she could come over. I said yes. She came the following Saturday morning, without Michael. She sat at my kitchen table and I made coffee and she wrapped both hands around the mug and for a while she just looked at it. Then she said, "I know I haven't been fair to you." I let the silence hold for a moment before I said anything. "Tell me what you mean by that," I said. She talked for a long time. Some of it was hard to hear. Some of it was harder than I had expected because it was more honest than I had thought she was capable of being. She told me that when she and Michael got married, she had been frightened of me. Not of me specifically, but of what I represented, the 40 years of history, the profound bond, the fact that Michael and I had a language between us that she couldn't access and didn't know how to enter. She had felt like an outsider in her own marriage, and her response to feeling like an outsider had been to take control. She had managed information between Michael and me. She admitted that directly, and the directness of it surprised me. She had shaped the picture each of us had of the other. She had made me seem more critical and intrusive to Michael than I was, and she had made him seem more withdrawn and unavailable to me than he naturally was. She had positioned herself as the interpreter between us, which gave her enormous power. "I don't think I did it consciously," she said. "Not all of it. Some of it I think I told myself was just managing things, keeping the peace." "And the money," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "The money is its own thing," she said. "I grew up with money and I don't know how to be careful with it. That's a real problem that I'm working on. But I also," she stopped. "I think I convinced myself that it was okay to ask you because the alternative was confronting the fact that we were spending more than we had. Asking you was easier than changing." It was an extraordinary thing for a person to admit. I didn't absolve her of it. I didn't say it was okay or that I understood or that we'd put it behind us. Those things were not true yet, but I told her that I respected her for saying it directly, and I told her that the conversation was a beginning. "I want to be in your lives," I said. "Both of you. I want a real relationship with my son and with you, but I need it to be real. I can't be managed." She nodded. She looked, for the first time since I had known her, like herself. Not the polished, curated version, just a woman who was tired of the performance. We talked for 2 hours. It was not a resolution. It was not a happy ending. It was the beginning of something more honest and more difficult and probably, eventually, more real. When she left, she hugged me at the door. Not a handshake this time. I held on for a moment. Things changed slowly. That's the thing about real change. It doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in the accumulation of smaller moments, one after another, until one day you look up and the landscape is different. By March, Michael was calling me every week again, not because Stephanie had arranged it, not as part of any structure or system, just calling, like he used to. He started coming over on Sunday mornings sometimes, alone, while Stephanie slept in or had her own plans. He would sit at my kitchen table and drink coffee, and we would talk about everything and nothing. His job, his plans, a book he was reading, a memory from when he was a kid that had come to him suddenly. The old conversation, the one that had always existed between us, slowly finding its way back. He told me, during one of these Sunday mornings, that he and Stephanie had started seeing a financial counselor. That Stephanie had suggested it herself, which had surprised him. They were working through the spending patterns and setting up a real budget for the first time in their marriage. I told him I thought that was a good thing. He said, "She's not a bad person, Mom." "I know," I said, and I meant it. Stephanie was not a villain. She was a person with significant blind spots and some genuinely harmful behaviors who had also, when confronted with herself, been willing to look. That was not nothing. "But she's not always easy," he said. "Neither am I," said. "Neither was your father." He laughed at that, really laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from the gut, and I thought, there he is, my son, still here. In April, Stephanie asked if she could help me in the garden. She had no idea how to garden. She killed a basil plant within 3 days of bringing it home from the farmer's market, which I found out later. But she showed up on a Saturday in April with gardening gloves she had clearly just bought, and she asked what she could do. I handed her a trowel, and I showed her what to do with it. We didn't talk a lot that afternoon. We just worked side by side in the dirt in the April sun, and there was something in the simplicity of it that felt significant. You can't perform in a garden. You just work. In May, I sat Michael down and I told him about the house. The full truth, the numbers, the current value, what it meant for his future. He was quiet through the whole thing. When I was done, he said, "Mom, I had no idea it was worth that much." "I know," I said. "Your father didn't want me to tell you until the right time." He nodded slowly. "What did he mean by the right time?" he asked. "I think," I said carefully, "he meant until he could see who you were going to become. The full version of you." I paused. "I think this is the beginning of that version." Michael looked at me. I failed you this past couple of years, he said. You did, I said, and I failed myself by not saying anything sooner. We both learned some things. What did Gerald tell you, he asked, about the estate planning? That I have options, I said, and that I should use them thoughtfully. I told him about the structure I had put in place. Not to punish him, but to protect the asset, to make sure that when the house came to him, it would come in a way that was stable and protected, not immediately available to be liquidated or used as a down payment on a lifestyle. I told him it was built with love, not suspicion. He didn't argue with it. He said, "That's fair, Mom." And then he said, "I want to pay you back, the money." I looked at him. "Not all at once," he said. "I can't do that, but I want to put something in writing and make regular payments. What we took from you, I want to return it, not because I legally have to, because it's right." I had not expected that. I had made peace with the $22,000 being gone. I had processed it as the cost of learning something important. I had not been holding it in front of me like a weapon or a wound. But the offer of it, the simple, unprompted, genuine offer, was the thing that finally made me cry in front of him, which I had not done yet through all of it, not once. I cried then. He came around the table and he hugged me the way he had when he was small, and I let myself be held by him for a minute, and I thought about Dennis and about how much I wished he could see this moment, this version of our son. People, when I eventually told pieces of this story to close friends, always wanted there to be a dramatic karmic moment. A single scene where Stephanie was humiliated, where Michael confronted her spectacularly, where something blew up in a satisfying public way. That's not what happened. What happened was quieter and more lasting. Stephanie's habit of overspending caught up with them in a way that I was not part of and did not orchestrate. They had been carrying credit card debt they hadn't fully disclosed to each other, and when they finally opened all the statements together in front of the financial counselor, the number was larger than either of them had known. The counselor was clear. They needed to significantly restructure their spending. The bathroom renovation was postponed indefinitely. The SUV was traded in for a more practical car. Stephanie took a part-time consulting job on top of her regular work. These were hard things, but they were their things to deal with, and dealing with them is what adults do. Stephanie told me, months later, that the financial counselor had asked her during one session who had been subsidizing the gap between their income and their spending. She had been honest. She had said, "My mother-in-law." The counselor had said, "And what does that cost her, not just financially, but in terms of the relationship?" Stephanie said she had started crying in the session. She didn't tell me this with pride. She told me with shame, which is different and more real. That shame, and what she chose to do with it, told me more about who Stephanie actually was than any of the behavior that had preceded it. A year after I had sat alone with a small chicken and Dennis's empty chair, we had Thanksgiving together. At my house. My idea, my invitation, and they both said yes immediately. Stephanie asked what she could bring. I said, "Your appetite and your patience. I'm making everything." She laughed a real laugh. I made the full spread. Turkey, stuffing, sweet potatoes with the marshmallows on top because Michael has loved that since he was 7. Cranberry sauce from scratch, not from a can, because Dennis had a rule about that. 2 kinds of pie. The good rolls that take 3 hours. We sat at my table, the same table where Dennis and I had eaten 10,000 meals, where Michael had done homework and argued and grown up. And we said what we were grateful for, which is a tradition Dennis started and which I have never once broken. Michael said he was grateful for the conversation in the diner. He said that directly in front of Stephanie. Stephanie said she was grateful for second chances. She looked at me when she said it. I said I was grateful for honesty, even when it came late. even when it came at a cost. And then we ate, and we talked, and Michael did the dishes, and Stephanie helped me wrap leftovers, and nobody had a 90-minute window, and nobody's access to their own child was managed or restricted or arranged. It was just a family. Imperfect and complicated and still healing and real. I have been asked by the friends I've told, by my sister in Michigan, by my neighbor Linda who sat with me through some of the hardest parts of this, whether I think it was worth it. All the difficulty, the months of silence and loneliness, the porch, the grocery bags, the November cold. And my answer is always the same. Yes. Because here is what I know now that I didn't know before. I know that love without boundaries is not unconditional love. It's a different thing, something closer to fear. Fear of losing the person. Fear of being alone. Fear of what it means if you say no. I had convinced myself for years that saying yes to everything, accepting every reduction of myself, every diminishment of access, every financial request, that this was love. That a good mother gives everything and asks for nothing. But giving everything does not make you loved. It makes you used. A good mother gives from a full place. She gives because she chooses to, freely, with eyes open. She doesn't give until her own account is empty, financially or emotionally, and then tell herself that that was the loving thing to do. I know now that the moment I started protecting myself, not attacking anyone, not punishing anyone, not withholding love, but simply protecting my own dignity, my own financial security, my own right to be in my son's life on terms that were real, that moment was not a failure of love. It was love, mature, clear-eyed, boundaried love. And I know something else. I know that my son was not lost. I had been afraid, in those dark months, that what I was seeing was the permanent end of something. That Michael had been so thoroughly turned that he was gone to me, that Stephanie had so completely reshaped his picture of me that the real one could never be recovered. But he wasn't gone. He was just confused and tired, and living in a version of reality that had been carefully constructed by someone who felt threatened, and that careful construction had worked for a while. But real things hold under pressure in ways that constructed things don't. The memory of who we were to each other held. It held through all of it. I want to tell you one more thing about Ruth's house. This past summer, I took Michael there. It was his first time seeing it since he was a child. He had vague memories of visiting his grandmother there, but not detailed ones. We walked through it together. It needed some work, paint, some updating, nothing structural, but it had Ruth's bones, Ruth's warmth, the craftsman woodwork, the deep porch, the little garden in the backyard that had grown wild since the last tenants moved out. Michael walked through every room quietly. He ran his hand along the banister of the staircase, the one Ruth had polished for 50 years. He said, "I can feel her in here." I said, "I know." We stood in the backyard in the summer afternoon light, and I told him what Dennis had said when he left it to me. That it was to come to Michael when the time was right, when the full version of Michael had emerged. "I think you're getting there," I said. "I'm not done deciding yet, but I think you're getting there." He nodded. "I want to earn it," he said. "I want to be the kind of person who deserves something like this." I looked at my son. "You already are," I said. "You just forgot for a while." He turned to me then, and I saw on his face what I had been waiting to see, not the tension, not the divided loyalty, not the distracted half-presence of a man pulled in too many directions by too many obligations. Just Michael, my Michael, open and present and mine. I reached up and I put my hand on his face, the way I used to when he was small, and I said, "Your father would be proud of you." He closed his eyes. "I hope so," he said. "Trust me," I said, "I knew him." If you're listening to this story and you recognize something in it, if there is a version of this situation in your own life, something being slowly taken from you, some relationship where you have made yourself smaller and smaller and told yourself it was love, I want to say something to you directly. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to have a boundary too. Hat exists not out of anger, but out of self-respect. You are allowed to love someone fully and completely while also refusing to be used by them. You are allowed to stand on your own porch and realize that the person who is pretending you don't exist does not get unlimited access to your heart, your money, and your sense of self. The version of love that requires you to disappear is not love. It's a transaction, and you deserve more than a transaction. The version of love that says, I will be here for you, I will give you what I can genuinely give, and I will require from you the dignity of being seen and respected. That's real. That's the love that lasts. That's the love that was waiting for Michael and me on the other side of all of this. Dennis used to say that the best thing you can do for the people you love is to be honest with them. Not harsh, honest. Honest about what you need. Honest about what you see. Honest about what is happening, even when you'd rather look away. I spent too long looking away. But I finally looked. And what I found, on the other side of that looking, was worth every hard moment that got me there. It's a Sunday morning as I write this. The light is coming through my kitchen window the way it always does in the morning, golden and slow, falling across the table in that particular way it has done for 30 years. Michael is coming over this morning. He texted last night, "See you around 10, Mom. Can you make the cinnamon rolls?" The cinnamon rolls. The ones I have been making for him since he was 8 years old. The ones with the cream cheese frosting that Dennis used to steal before they were even cool. I made the dough last night because it needs to rise overnight, just like it always has. The house smells like cinnamon and butter. Dennis's chair is still at the table. I still make too much coffee. Some things you carry forward. Some things you let go of. Learning to know the difference, that, I think, is what it means to grow up. Not at 22. Not even at 40. Sometimes you don't fully learn it until you're standing on a porch in the November cold with 2 bags of groceries, and the door doesn't open, and something shifts inside you that has been waiting to shift for a very long time. I put those grocery bags down on the porch that morning. I walked to my car. And I drove towards something better. I didn't know it yet. But I was. Thank you for listening to my story. If any of it moved you, or helped you, or made you think, please share it. And if you have ever been the person standing on the porch, know this: the door not opening is not the end of the story. It's the beginning.